Did you want to leave the video on or you want to turn it off?
Doesn't matter. We can leave it on. It's fine.
Probably not going to look at you though.
All right. So, Charisse, the recording of our first podcast. How you feeling?
I was thinking about it yesterday. I was like, I have to think about sounding smart, which is probably like not the right way to go about it, but like that's what I was thinking about.
I think putting too much pressure on yourself is a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so right now I just work on not feeling pressure.
All right. Well, you know what? We ran through a little bit of, I guess, structure, especially since the first quote-unquote pilot. Maybe we start off by introducing ourselves. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm Charisse. I've been working with you and Alex on MAEKAN since July of last year. So when I started out with you guys, I was doing design things because that's what I do for a day job. Well, like that's what I do for other people besides you guys. And then now I do more of community and I guess the side of MAEKAN that's user facing right now is how I would describe.
That's a fair assessment, I'd say.
Yeah.
I guess I'll do a little bit intro by myself. I'm Eugene. I'm the editor-in-chief and co-founder of MAEKAN. You know, besides from editorial, I do a lot of other things, which is kind of what happens when you're a co-founder. I mean, it'll probably unveil itself over the course of, you know, maybe this podcast, not even just this episode, but going forward. But I think one thing that is important is that in this current day and age, when anybody and everybody can start a podcast, what do we see missing in the podcast space, which necessitated this? I
think before we started recording, you and I have interesting conversations already. And I'm sure many people have interesting conversations between the two of them, but I think that we talk about a large variety of things, which is one of the things we've identified is unique about MAEKAN users, people who are interested in tech and art and hip hop and good food and just a whole variety of subjects.
One thing that we also wanted to do was find a way to like put down ideas and thoughts as we were talking onto paper and pen. Some of it might be from our MAEKAN briefing, which for those who you don't know, it's a newsletter we send out twice a week that kind of highlights some interesting cultural news, stuff that hopefully is not something you'd find everywhere else. You know, for example, like the new Apple releases is something that we deliberately didn't want to talk about, but we'll talk about here. I guess maybe we'll just jump right into it.
Go for it.
First and foremost, I thought that was really interesting when Banksy put together this little campaign where he was trying to encourage people to vote a certain way in exchange for a free print.
Okay, I thought about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is my thought. Sorry, I cut you off at the end there because I was so excited to tell you this. I don't think anyone was going to vote conservative just to redeem the print.
I don't know. I think that it's kind of, some people make a farce out of that. And it's like, if a Banksy print can be worth upwards of, I don't know, let's just throw out an arbitrary number. Let's say it's worth £1,000.
Okay.
That's £1,000 for someone who's, from a voter perspective, might be apathetic in the first place. And there might, even that perspective of, one vote doesn't really make a difference.
Okay, so I actually think you hit on what I think it did do, is that it made voting appealing to young people, which admittedly the UK has, globally, there's a problem with this, where young people are not going out to vote. So, I mean, I understand why it's illegal, but I also thought that it was clever. Because in my opinion, I don't think anyone was going to vote conservative that wasn't already, and vote for Labour if it wasn't already. But it might have gotten a bigger turnout.
Got it. Part of me wonders, and this is obviously a much larger debate, but the way that you incentivize people to care about things, it's always going to be in question, right? Like I always look at any sort of incentivization through product. I always look at the Toms or the Live Strong model, where here you have really big ideas that have been distilled to essentially a consumer product.
Right.
And what does that actually say when your involvement is really just through a product? And that to me is, I understand the power and impact. You know, like having something tangible is super powerful. But the fact of the matter is that the actual intent behind it is a little bit misconstrued. And that to me, I think needs to be addressed, because it's like, if these people don't care and they're only doing it in exchange for a print, I think there's deeper ramifications there that need to be addressed.
Man, you just opened a whole other can of worms, because it's like the idea of charitable giving that is linked to also a commercial product, and whether or not, if someone gives, does it matter if they partially gave for reasons other than believing in the cause?
Yeah. I always, to that point, a good example is whenever you have sportswear companies getting involved in particular social movements.
Like NBA Cares?
NBA Cares could be one. It could be even Nike or Adidas releasing Be True. Well, Nike releasing Be True, which is their product that kind of speaks to the openness and what's the right word I'm looking for? Basically, a sense of openness to sexuality, right? Or even Black History Month. Those to me are interesting, because at the end of the day, does it create awareness? 100%. I think there has to be, you just have to come to terms with the fact it's a soft selling tactic, where it's like, hey, you know what? This is my point of injection, where you might not have cared about this had the shoe not released, but at least it's in front of you. And for better or worse, I don't think you can really fault brands for doing that. I mean, it's a bit of a PR thing, no doubt, which it's still net positive. If there's any other way for me to look at it, it's still net positive. Yeah,
I think that's a good way to phrase it. I think there are some unsavory things about brands doing that for their own imaging, but I'm also not opposed, because if it works, I would rather people be aware and noticing these problems than unaware and no one furthering the cause.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's kind of
part of this question that you asked me when we were going to talk about Banksy was the thoughts on the power of art in political messaging. Okay, that was your phrasing. And
yeah, that's how I kind of was talking about it.
What I wanted to ask is, have you noticed that there's this inverse correlation where political situations get worse and then art gets better?
No, I haven't. I have never thought of it that way.
Okay, can you think about it and tell me if I'm wrong, or if you have any observations on that?
I would. I mean, it does make sense on the basis that the emotional impact is arguably stronger when things get worse, right?
Right.
And I think there's a little bit more restraint in what you're doing. But what actually might make it easier is that contextually it becomes such a well understood idea. The piece that Banksy ultimately was going to release was his iconic girl with the balloon floating away, but the balloon was created as a Union Jack. And I think actually in reality, that's pretty powerful. It's so simple, but even if you've never seen any of Banksy's previous work, I think it's very fitting.
Yeah.
Which maybe to your point, it's when the political climate is a little bit sour and everyone is under the same everyone's familiar with the same topics, there reduces the level of explanation, perhaps. And I think that's what makes it more powerful, even more powerful, if you have 50 million people that are all familiar with what this means without really even being familiar with Banksy as an artist, his previous work. That's actually a pretty good point. I've never looked at it because I've never seen in a chronological order of what art looked like then and then now based on a political climate. But that's something that's worth exploring.
Yeah. I stand by my hypothesis, and I'd be interested if I could pull up relevant numbers on people's engagement and the impact. I don't know how you quantify the impact of art, but I suspect that it's higher now.
Yeah. Maybe we can move on to the next topic.
Sure thing.
Apple releases. So admittedly, I'm not an Apple user aside from using an iPhone. So honestly, whenever these release, I feel, and this is this is my kind of my overarching theme about Apple computer products is, I mean, I'm not going to switch to an Apple
Why don't you tell people what your setup is?
It's always, it's funny because when it comes to my divulging what I use, sometimes I just don't even bother because the natural course of the conversation is like, oh, I thought you'd be an Apple user. I'm like, well, I'm not. Like, and this dates back to like, when I was younger, I was like, dude, I grew up in a PC household, and then when it was time to actually buy my own computer, I was like, man, I don't want to drop money on a MacBook. So I've never really diverged from that path. And even then, like for me, like PCs 100% work for me. They fulfill what I need to do. Arguably, I've never been very heavy into the visual side of design and creation, but it's always been something like, especially like Lenovo, even though it's a Chinese-owned company, which a lot of people tend to shit on, it still does a decent product. It's up to mil spec. The keyboard's solid. That's honestly one of the main reasons why I always go back to Lenovo. But
that makes sense.
The ultimate thing is that like pricing, and I guess even from a philosophical standpoint of open versus closed, like I just teeter more on the open side. But I have to say, when I started using an iPhone, the thing that keeps bringing me back is just the app ecosystem is so much more refined. I mean, I haven't used an Android phone in probably like a year and a half. And like when I left that system, I was like, and went to Apple, I was like, man, everything is so much more considered. Everything works so much more seamlessly, albeit there's certain things that I really hate about it. Like it just seems hard to get files off your phone.
Okay.
But aside from that.
So for you, as a non-Apple user, okay, and also someone who is not really in the market for any of these Apple products, right? Like you're not seriously looking. What to you stuck out the most from the keynote? Like what would you say was the most significant announcement?
Well, the most significant one was probably the release of the Pro, just because I've heard the grumblings for far too long.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But the thing is that I don't know anyone that owns a Pro. And I'm not talking about the MacBook Pro. I'm talking about like the desktop, right?
You mean the
$5,000 machine?
Well, so.
But to finish my point.
So I did some research. Okay, so you finish your point first.
Let me finish my point.
I will let you finish your point.
It's as nice as it is. Okay. I don't know any of my friends that are gonna go out and buy it. You know what I mean? So it's like it's almost a moot point. It's like it's a nice to have, but I mean the reality is everyone's moving around. Yeah. It's kind of like it's nice, but it's such a small percentage of users that I'll probably never see one in the flesh.
Okay, so wait. I had a clarification to make to our conversation yesterday, which is off the record about this. This is the first iMac Pro ever released. Okay, but you could argue, hey, couldn't Apple have just called it an iMac and this be like the newest iMac instead of tacking a Pro to the end of it? Whatever. Let's just call this completely new machine. The Pro that you're referring to, I think you're referring to, is actually a standalone computer, so no display.
Yeah, it's a desktop, right?
Yeah, it's a desktop. It's like a triangular prism kind of shape. And that they are still going to update in like 2018 or 2019. So like this iMac Pro isn't their answer to not updating that machine.
Yeah. But I mean, I look at it, and honestly, back to your question, what's most exciting? I'm still waiting for it to materialize, but Apple's been such an influential player in the podcast world, and they're apparently going to update their podcast app and just how they serve podcasts. And obviously, as for us being so heavily focused on sights and sounds, seeing what the reality of that will be is going to be pretty exciting, I'd say, because I mean. That and it's almost all the stuff that they've released that was exciting to me has been the software side of things. Because the hardware, to be honest, like you can get cheaper equivalent hardware somewhere else. You know, it's a software for me that Apple actually does a great job for the most part.
Yeah.
But I mean, even things like, you know, the ability to pay friends with Apple Pay going forward. Like just by virtue of Apple being this sort of this omnipresent thing in so many people's lives.
Yep.
I mean, that in itself is going to be really amazing. I also came across a really interesting point in that, you know, you have all these companies that have different sort of monetization and like roads to monetization. Obviously with Apple, you're buying hardware, right? You're buying that user experience with the hardware. Let's use Google or YouTube. I mean, YouTube's probably a better example. YouTube and Facebook are monetizing through advertising.
Right.
Right? So what is the actual experience that they're going to create for users when, you know, I need to serve you ads? And you as like a user, I need to serve you. I'm going to use this word because it was funny. It was mentioned in Slack. A delightful hardware experience. You know, for those that aren't familiar, like we had this little conversation in the Slack community about buzzwords we hate from the agency world. And one of the members, Wayne, he had a massive disdain for the use delightful or delight. Creating delight through experiences.
Okay, so your question is about companies that monetize through advertising and how that appears on Apple hardware?
No, it's more how will the user experience be when I'm optimizing for advertising versus the user experience when I'm basically optimizing for a purchase that pertains to hardware.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But I mean, in that whole dialogue, like someone actually made a good point where if you distill and strip away all of it, the actual reality is they're both trying to earn your trust, right? So they're earning your trust through like a social media platform versus they're earning your trust through a great hardware experience. So maybe it's actually not that different. You know, the end goal is the same, but I'm just curious because I don't know the answer. I'm not familiar enough with the UX side of it, UX UI side of it, of how those different experiences will look and feel, despite the fact that it's the same goal.
Huh. Well, I hadn't thought about that subject.
Neither had I. And then it just like popped up I was just reading some stuff this morning.
But I did think about, you know, you're excited about the software changes, and I agree with you, like they're exciting. And there's updates to the Watch OS, to Siri's intelligence, to the Home Siri, like the HomePod that they came out, which is going to be the competitor for Echo. And my question is, do you think Apple might someday use all of this data that they're gathering from this Apple ecosystem and sell it?
No, because I don't think it's to their benefit because they're not. I think that this selling the data in itself to an outside party, like I think they would just internalize it and utilize it for their own benefit. But
you think that would happen though? Like they're going to, you know?
I'm sure it's already happening. I'm sure they're collecting massive amounts of data.
So does it worry you?
Somewhat optimize. You know what? This is an interesting thing too because I was thinking about it, and there's as much as we're all up in arms about privacy.
Yeah.
How many people like when that little pop-up comes up on your iPhone, allow?
Yeah.
Just allow. Click allow.
Right.
Like it's almost like a non-issue. People are up in arms about privacy, but this is the thing too, is that despite all the sort of moments of privacy that we kind of let people into our lives, most of it pertains back to the selling of something, which is not inherently malicious, right? Like if I allow someone to target me a bit better, my life can generally be the same. I mean, I get targeted. I mean, we all get targeted so much, but I honestly can't say that I'm necessarily influenced by the targeting that comes across, you know, in those instances. And that to me is something that, you know, are we actually as worried about privacy as we say we are? I think we're not.
Well, I will answer your question or response to this, but I also want to tell you a funny story. I was at a coffee shop and I like to eavesdrop on people. So there's
You told me the worst for this.
Did I already?
Heads up. You remember we were trying to have a meeting in the office and you're like, I need to turn music on or I'm going to listen to this person's conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so you already know this about me. Yeah. So you can't have a confidential conversation in my earshot. Just gonna put that out there for anyone who encounters me in public. So I was listening to these two women, and one of them was complaining to the other woman about why she switched to Android. Okay? She had an iPhone. She switched to an Android phone because she didn't like that when she bought a new app on the App Store, the App Store would ask her to re-enter her password. Her complaint was, I've entered it before. You should have my password saved and just let me buy the app on one touch.
All right.
So this woman is like, let's throw privacy out the window. Like, just save all of my information, make it super easy for me to do everything.
Yeah.
But to respond to your question, I do think you raise an interesting point. It's like almost, we should be worried about privacy. So we're saying these things, or like I'm saying these things about like, what does Apple know, right? But am I genuinely concerned? Like, is it going to change my habits? Can we go back 1 second to talk about the iMac Pro?
Yeah.
Why do you think that Apple developed this machine?
There's still part of me that believes that Apple needs to really have some sort of discussion, and I say discussion, I mean like relationship with its core creators, and I think that's one thing that Apple has always wanted to claim. It's like they need to have that relationship and that dialogue because it offers credibility, right?
Yeah.
To know that. I mean, it's probably bullshit, but like, this piece of work was done on that machine. It's kind of like, it's no different than, when you're seeing billboards from iPhones, they're like, hey, shot by so-and-so on the iPhone 7.
Yeah.
I think those things are inherently opportunities for them to market. But I mean, I think it's also misguided for me to think that way. Although I'm sure there's so many inner workings that exist, but to create something for a marketing opportunity is probably wrong. It's more, I think there is a genuine like desire to enhance and be a part of the conversation with high level creatives.
I mean, I don't think it's a purely marketing scheme. I do agree that it is in part a marketing scheme to be in touch with these creators and this, that first niche Mac, that Apple user.
Yeah.
But I also think is that they have to still genuinely be and appear to be a company that is advancing technology.
Yeah.
I guess there's no way to fake that. Like, they can't fake being a technologically advanced pioneer. So they have to actually make products that are still, like people were calling this machine bonkers, right? Like their tech still has to be like, this hasn't been done before.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm actually glad you hit on the same thing as me, that like a large portion of this is branding.
Yeah. Yeah. Enough Apple talk though.
Yeah.
Let's move on to maybe one of the last pieces of the briefing was Kodak's new print publication.
Okay.
Kodak has been such an interesting brand because I don't think there's been something that was arguably so present in the lives of so many people, like especially me growing up, like, when you thought photography, especially in North America, like there was no Fuji really. Like it was always Kodak. The symbolism of that orange was everywhere. And then obviously within the matter of, a generation and a half, I mean, I'm making that number up, but in a very short span, it basically disappeared from one of the major industries it built. So now like we're going into a place where a lot of things are returning to this analog world. Mm-hmm. Handmade shoes, film, vinyl. it makes me wonder if that is sort of the new and potentially final resting place of Kodak. And I say that not because it's going to turn over anytime soon, but it's more that, hey, you know what? This is something they do incredibly well. And this is what people identify with them as, you know, being a company that produces, you know, Portra 400 is everyone's, not everyone, but a lot of people love Portra 400. So why not just like play to that strength? And just, you know, forget all the other stuff. Forget about creating, you know, a digital camera, a mobile phone, albeit, you know, I understand the business implications because that is where the future is going. But maybe for the time being, there's a strategy that allows them to to kind of have a foothold here before moving on to, you know, other opportunities.
Do you think that Kodak saw this coming? Like, do you think Kodak knew that they were going to wind up in this position of being culturally cool, that analog was going to come back around?
No, I don't think so.
So this just kind of fell in their laps.
I don't think anyone could have predicted it because it's such a nuanced discussion. So much of it comes down to kind of the social climate, right? The cultural climate. You know, if maybe the progression of digital wasn't as quick as it was, that burnout wouldn't have occurred. And then we wouldn't be pushed back the other way. Because I would see in many ways, analog is a pushback against digital and the things digital doesn't do well, or the fact it's so overwhelming. Right?
Okay, so if you don't think Kodak planned this, like this just sort of fell in their laps, like they got lucky, is what you're saying, right?
I would say in many ways, yeah, there's a bit of luck because you can't really control. I personally don't think there was enough that Kodak was doing to influence popular culture aside from creating a great product. You know, there is influence in that, but I mean, people were just naturally finding Portra 400. It wasn't like them being in the consciousness of consumers everywhere. Right. Just more like, hey, you know what? Portra 400 or just whatever existing film, T-Max or whatever, like it's probably what you could buy at your local store. And that was sort of a gateway. You know, and I would say that, yeah, sorry.
So if that's the case, what is Kodak supposed to do now? Or if you were at Kodak, what would you suggest that the tactic be? Because the tactic surely is not like, let's just sit around, you know, people will continue to think we're cool.
If I was at Kodak, honestly, I think you need to find a way to double down and create sustainability through the film movement. You know, and I say that because currently there are bits and pieces of sustainability, but I think if you took, you know, 2 steps back, film as an industry, it's not hanging by a thread, but it could so easily have its legs knocked out from underneath it. Okay. You know, and a big part of that comes from there's no cameras around. There's no film cameras that are being produced in 2017. I mean, you have like Lomography that is like the only sort of like probably modern day, not really modern, but it's the only new film camera you could buy. Right. But where, you know, how is that industry, or, you know, if you don't have working cameras in 5 years, 10 years, like what's going to happen? Right. You know, I mean, you could use the argument that, like, you know, this is probably stupid, but like if you make a product for children, right? And, you know, in 10 years there are no children, you know, then what happens? Like, who are you going to service this product to? And I can speak from my own issues. Like, I've bought cameras off eBay, and you know, they work for 3 months, and after that, they're essentially dead. You can't, even if you want to get it fixed, either there's no expertise or people just don't want to deal with it. Right. So you need to kind of create, the current demand is there, right? And but how do you make sure that one of the most important parts of the usage of your product can be maintained? Right. I mean, from your perspective, how do you see the current analog world playing out in terms of, from a lifestyle perspective? Do you see people continually finding ways to balance digital and analog? Because I think that's, you know, you and I probably have different digital appetites, you probably create things that I would never even touch. Like I would never, whether it's illustration or whatever, I don't really do that.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that.
Right. Which is funny because I'm the one drawing digitally and you're the one using an actual pen.
I mean, it's because I don't have a
you don't
tablet.
have a tablet. We should trade. We should trade next time. I keep thinking that there is going to be whiplash, that we're going to reach some saturation point with analog handcrafted things, and then it's going to go back again to digital. And I don't know if I say that out of like a fear, like, man, it's like just a trend. I wish it was going to stick around, but people's attention spans are short. Or if I say that because, so one is either out of fear and I want it to stick around, or if I think that people are just kind of, this is such a shitty thing to say about myself, but like, I don't like that people are sort of adopting this analog culture in some kind of ingenuine way, which is terrible. I know. For
the quote unquote coolness of it, because that's what everyone else is doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also wonder if analog is like is going to be a phase that everyone goes through in the future.
I don't think it will be. The reason why I don't think it's a phase is because analog is humanistic. And when people understand, the value of doing things from it's a word I overuse a lot, but like just from a humanistic perspective, I think the value is undeniable.
No, I mean sorry, I meant a life phase. Like current.
Oh.
Yeah, like when kids become 13, they're going to be like, I hate my devices. Someone give me a film camera, someone give me pen and paper, and then like from now on, every teenager from like 13 to 25 is going to have this analog phase of their lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good point because there's a lot of times when I pull out a film camera and a lot of people resonate with it because it was part of the youth and now it's no longer part of their youth per se.
Yeah.
But it comes down to certain things. It's like the accessibility of it is important. Like the fact of the matter is like if you want to get into film photography right now, even finding a camera is not the easiest thing. It's not like you can go into a store or go on Amazon and buy a new one. It's like, oh, you know what? How do I buy anytime you buy something used, there's so many questions like, am I getting ripped off? Is this going to work? And I think that's one of the key parts of sustainability, which photography, honestly, film photography will struggle relative to other mediums, I'd say. Like, in the sense that when it comes to vinyl, I think there's a greater sense of, well, I mean, I don't DJ, so I don't know what it's like to get a new set of turntables. Obviously, all other forms of analog art generally quite accessible. Pen and paper, that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, that is an interesting point.
Yeah.
So it's funny because we've actually already been talking like 40 minutes, and
so maybe on that note, this is where we end things off.
Yeah, that's fine with me.